Okay. Tara. Good afternoon, everyone. Muy buenas tardes a todos. Mi nombre es Janet Noltenius y en nombre de Casa de la Cultura El Salvador le damos esta bienvenida al panel número 3 de una exposición que está ahorita viéndose en la Universidad de Maryland. Good afternoon, everyone, and it is a pleasure for me to be here on behalf of Casa de la Cultura El Salvador, a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C., that celebrates, educates, and promotes Salvadoran arts and culture. It's on behalf of the University of Maryland, the Stamp Gallery, and also the School of Languages, Literature, and Cultures, and the Department of Spanish and Portuguese. This panel this afternoon is linked to the big expo that we have currently at STAMP. It's called Connected Diaspora, Central American Visuality in the Age of Social Media. Este panel está relacionado con esta exposición que ya va a estar en la Galería STAMP de la Universidad de Maryland hasta el mes de diciembre. First of all, I want to say that every community owes its existence and strength to the generations before them around the world, who contribute their hopes, dreams, and energy into making history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to migrate from their homes in the hope of a better life. And some have lived on this land for more than generations that we can count. Truth and acknowledgements are critical to building mutual respect and connections across all barriers and heritages and differences. At the STAMP Gallery, we believe that it's important to create dialogue to honor those who have been historically and systemically disenfranchised. So we acknowledge the truth that is often buried. We are on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway people, who were among the first in the Western Hemisphere. We are on indigenous land that was stolen from the Piscataway people by European colonists. We pay respect to the Piscataway elders and ancestors. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. Es importante reflexionar todo el tiempo de por qué estamos ahorita nosotros aquí en la Universidad de Maryland y en el área de Washington, estamos en tierras indígenas, donde esos indígenas originales fueron desplazados de una manera violenta y sus tierras se les fueron quitadas. Entonces, es importante siempre reflexionar en por qué estamos aquí, dónde estamos y cuál es la importancia de saber que mucha gente vino a Estados Unidos no porque quiso, sino obligadamente, como los esclavos. Otros estaban aquí y fueron desplazados por los inmigrantes que llegaron. Entonces hay que respetar a los ancestros, respetar a los indígenas, donde ahorita estamos nosotros actuando y moviéndonos. Con eso quería darle las gracias por estar con nosotros y como vamos a funcionar esta tarde es que tenemos a una moderadora que va a presentar a las 3 artistas invitadas esta tarde. We have a moderator that will be here with us and I will introduce her because she will introduce the 3 artists that have been so generous in coming together and connecting their work to connect the diaspora. The moderator is Wanda Hernandez. She's a doctoral student at the Department of American Studies at the University of Maryland. Her research interest revolves around the formation of race and ethnic identity among U.S. Central Americans through material and visual culture, space and place, and performance in the everyday life. In addition to academia, Wanda is an independent curator and cultural organizer. In 2017, she curated Nuestras Historias, Latinos in Richmond, the first bilingual exhibition to explore Latina heritage in Virginia. Currently, she is part of the curatorial collective named Creating Casa, which organizes arts exhibitions and public programs that questions Latinx identity and placemaking in the Washington metropolitan area. Their next show is entitled Siempre Aquí, que va a abrir en abril del 2021 y que nos da las memorias de los latinos en el área metropolitana de Washington, D.C. Así es que sin más les quiero decir que Wanda es la moderadora, que ella está sacando su doctorado en la Universidad de Maryland y que ha creado este grupo que está promoviendo la cultura que se llama Creating Casa. Sin más, without further ado, Wanda Hernández.
Thank you, Jeanette. Estoy tan feliz de estar aquí. I'm really excited to be here. And like I say, I am most fluent in Spanglish, so please bear with me as I navigate both languages. But as Jeanette said, without further ado, we're here to hear from 3 amazing Central American artists, and I have the honor to be the moderator. I hope that even through the World Wide Web, we can send them positive vibes and give each of our speakers a warm welcome virtually, right? Up first, we have Kiara Eileen Machado, who was born in 1993 in Linwood, California. She received her BFA with honors in painting and drawing from California State University in Long Beach. Machado's cultural background as Guatemalan and Salvadoran is central to her work. Through this cultural framework, her work explores complexities of intersecting identities in Central American diasporas in Southern California. Her body of work brings into question the absence and exclusion of Central American folks from the mainstream US and Latinx narratives. Mainly working with oil on canvas, Machado combines cultural imagery and a diverse selection of plants with a vivid color palette. If you've had the opportunity to experience her work, you will know that she obscures and camouflages the figures into the surrounding environment to create a narrative that highlights the erasure experienced with marginalized communities. Machado has exhibited widely throughout California, including places like Los Angeles, Long Beach, Hollywood, Pomona, Highland Park, Compton, Baldwin Park, Irvine, San Pedro, Playa Vista, and San Francisco, as well as she's exhibited beyond the state of California in places like the University of Central Florida in Orlando, the Frederick Jameson Gallery at Duke University in North Carolina, the Anne Marie Sculpture Garden Art Center in Solomon, Maryland, and currently at the Stamp Gallery at the University of Maryland. Her work has been celebrated not only in the United States, but also internationally as a part of Art Without Borders in Florence, Italy. And most recently, Machado's artist activist ethic has motivated her to participate in a collaborative mural with Central American migrants at the border between Tijuana and San Diego, alongside the collective Quetzal Migrante. She now lives and works out of the San Gabriel Valley and will be speaking about her work first. Join me in welcoming Kiara.
So, hello, thank you so much for that intro, Wanda. It's nice to meet you. Like Wanda mentioned, my name is Kiara Eileen Machado, and I have a very strong base here in Southern California, as I was born and raised here. So my perspective and my lived experiences are very much influenced by my living here in the West Coast. Entonces, hola, buenas tardes acá en California y buenas noches, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Kiara Eileen Machado y gracias a Wanda por la introducción. Entonces, yo nací y siempre he vivido acá en el sur de California. Entonces, mi experiencia viviendo acá y siendo centroamericana también se reflexionan en las cosas que yo enseño en mi arte, en lo que yo decido en pintar sobre mi arte. So obviously being incredibly proud of being Central American, my identity plays a huge part into what I want to talk about, specifically, obviously, having this cultural framework and intersecting factors. My mom is from Guatemala, my dad is from El Salvador, and my great-grandmother from, my mother's side was from Honduras. Unfortunately, I don't know too much about my great-grandmother, but I am in the process of learning more about her, as I do feel, or at least in my experience, I feel it is a little harder to learn more about family history past like the first and second generation, but I'm very proud of my roots and culture. Entonces, me identifico como centroamericana, mi mamá es de Guatemala y mi papá es de El Salvador, y mi bisabuela del lado de mi mamá es de Honduras. Afortunadamente no sé mucho de mi bisabuela, pero estoy en el proceso de aprender más sobre ella, que siento un poco que, o por lo menos en nuestra experiencia, es un poco difícil saber o aprender más sobre nuestros antecedentes pasado como de la primera o segunda generación, pero sí estoy en el proceso de aprender más sobre mi bisabuela por conversaciones que tengo con mi abuelita. So obviously being incredibly proud of being Central American, but not really being able to see myself be reflected through that or through representation. And I feel that validating someone's identity is incredibly important. And this also goes not just of my identity, but also with my name. A lot of people find it hard to pronounce. So growing up, you know, a lot of people just didn't try or would refer to me as a number, but I'd always correct them. My parents have always, you know, taught us to be proud of who we are and not beginning with our name. And so obviously talking about or trying to explore, first of all, what Central American identity signifies and what that means to me. And also being so proud and talking about Central American erasure of, you know, consistently having the same conversations over and over again of what is Central America. And it is kind of baffling to me, especially in how close Central America is geographically, and also how much the US has imposed itself in Central American political issues. I think is very interesting to me in being in that middle ground. Entonces para mí es importante de hablar sobre mi identidad, porque soy bien orgullosa de dónde son mis papás, y mis papás siempre nos han enseñado el poder sobre nuestra identidad. Y esto también he pensado desde mi nombre. Muchas personas lo encuentran bien difícil de pronunciar, y creciendo también a veces me referían a mí como solo como llamándome K o sobre un nombre, pero yo siempre los he corregido porque mis papás también como siempre han hablado sobre el poder de llamarnos por nuestros nombres. So in talking and trying to show Central American erasure through my work in a narrative and a storytelling type of way, I use a lot of the same elements, or these elements are very prominent throughout my work. And that is the use of worry dolls or quitapenas and dolls or muñecas from Guatemala. And I often obscure them or hide them or camouflage them throughout my work, because I really want the viewer to really work for what they're looking for. And in this sense, in hiding them and camouflaging them, it's physically showing that Central American erasure, you know, that we're here, but we're often not given that platform, or somebody else is talking about us. So I feel that it is incredibly important for us to be able to hold our own narratives, because only, you know, we know what we've been through and being able to share those experiences, but by us having that power. Entonces yo siento que es bien importante para que nosotros podamos tener esa narrativa y de poder hablar sobre nuestras historias, de no tener otros hablando sobre nosotros, pero nosotros tener ese poder y esa plataforma de hablar sobre lo que nosotros pasamos sobre. Y algunos elementos que siempre se miran constantemente dentro de mi trabajo es el uso de las quitapenas y las muñecas de Guatemala, que muchos de estas cositas y recuerditos siempre han estado en nuestra familia por muchas décadas, entonces son bien especiales para nuestra familia. Y siempre como los escondo las quitapenas, porque yo quiero que las personas que estén mirando a mis pinturas que realmente trabajen para ver, o cuando finalmente encuentren algo que sea como de trabajar, trabajar duro para ver lo que están mirando. Y mi esperanza es que lo más que miren mis pinturas, que más miren como cosas que he escondido. Y a veces algunas cosas que yo pinto no quiero que siempre se miren. So I work a lot with kind of obscuring and hiding and these little secrets for some things. So what I hope for is the viewer that the more that they look at it, look at my painting, that the more that the painting itself will reveal itself. But some of the things that I do paint are never meant to be seen or found. By working in a way of multiple layers and scraping back and working on top. And I mean, obviously now it's hard with COVID to see paintings and go to exhibitions in person. But, with working with thick layers and to be able to see, or to maybe like question, like what is behind like a leaf, or what was once there, to kind of ask yourself these questions and bring up these conversations of like, questioning what could or possibly is there. Entonces, muchas veces en la forma que yo trabajo, pinto cosas y después pinto encima de ellas, y es una forma de como traer preguntas de qué está ahí, o preguntarse a sí mismo, tal vez algo estaba ahí o tal vez es otra cosa. Entonces siempre como trayendo una conversación de realmente mirar la pintura, y algunas cosas sí se van a revelar y otras no siempre se van a revelar. And then obviously another main component that is consistent throughout my work as well is the use of plant life, of botanicals. And with this, I really want to draw in my Southern California base and tying that in with Guatemala and El Salvador. I use a lot the use of palm leaves, because I find that like palm trees are a very interesting factor, especially since they're so well known to Southern California, but yet the palm trees themselves are migrants, they're not native to this land. So I find that really interesting that it's so well known here, as folks not really questioning, but because they're everywhere here. And then also that kind of also triggers like a memory or nostalgia of the uses of the decorative use of palm leaves for festivities in Guatemala and El Salvador, whether that be at, holidays or even religious ceremonies. So it is also very nurturing and nostalgic, and kind of also like to recharge from so many things that are going on. Otro elemento que yo uso dentro de mis pinturas es el uso de plantas y hojas tropicales, que estos elementos de usar flores y plantas me conectan de el sur de California a Guatemala y El Salvador. Entonces soy bien específica en escoger plantas que realmente me recuerdan a cada uno de estos lugares, y el significado de por qué estoy usando estas plantas y cómo he agarrado estas plantas. Entonces, en muchas de mis pinturas uso estas hojas porque me recuerdan a lo tropical y la resistencia también de Centroamérica. And then obviously another thing is to the heightened saturation and the colors that I use within my work. It is very unlimited, and I think it's just so natural for me to include color on top of color with like more color. Sometimes I'll go in, obviously like some of them, like this one shown here, is limited, is predominantly green, but I still do try to infuse it with a little bit of like hints of other colors. And my use of color, I think, just comes from being so inspired by my surroundings. You know, we have hammocks in almost every room, and that's just like such a norm for us. And, you know, obviously like hammocks are a bunch of different colors, or like it's like a very vibrant red, or pillowcases, or even shirts that, you know, are from Central America are very colorful and vibrant. So even though I am using a very bright palette, usually the things that I'm discussing are very heavy topics. So also kind of interplaying on, you know, you're seeing one thing, but the story is also, you know, heavy. You know, our bodies are heavy with intergenerational trauma, consistently going through these cycles. And, you know, obviously we see with the things that are going on at the borders and consistently, you know, xenophobia and things like that. Entonces, otra cosa que siempre se me hace bien natural de usar es el color dentro de mis pinturas. Y eso viene de tener hamacas en cada cuarto y solo ver como los colores de las cosas y recuerditos que siempre agarramos y traemos de Guatemala y El Salvador, de tener tantos colores dentro de una cosita chiquita. Entonces, para mí es bien natural de poner un poquito de color y después más color. Y aunque sea que esté usando mucho color, las cosas que estoy hablando sobre en mis pinturas muchas veces son bien duras y bien difíciles de hablar. So I often find that like Central American erasure is like this middle ground of constantly being visible and invisible, knowing that we exist, but not really being represented, having so much pride, but not really seeing ourselves or learning about ourselves even within education. I feel that accessibility is a huge thing. You know, I grew up getting incredibly excited whenever I would even just see like Belize or Panama just like listed off, and that was the most bare minimum. So I think even seeing that and how excited I was getting, you know, it shows really how deprived I was of having access to Central American literature or art, or even learning about our contributions. Entonces, no teniendo tanto representación en educación o las narrativas de los Estados Unidos, o también en a veces dentro narrativas de la comunidad Latinx, me ponía tan feliz de como solo oír cuando, como decían, Belice o Panamá o Honduras, como me ponía tan feliz, y ahí me enseñaba como qué tanto me hacía falta de oír cosas positivas o de vernos en otros aspectos o oír o leer sobre nosotros en educación. Y eso es el inacceso de tener literatura o arte que viene de Centroamérica. So with my artwork, I really work with like a narrative or storytelling in trying to create this platform. Obviously, I'm only one representation of endless identities that make up Central America. And even within Central America, you know, the different layers and factors that go into, you know, how one identifies or may identify. So I find intersecting and identity so important, and to obviously validate that. So through trying to create this platform for Central American folks, and obviously having like two different cultures merging into one, I think is very interesting too. And then obviously third, you know, understanding my privilege of having been born here and having a very US based perspective to my Central Americanness. Entonces, en siempre hablando de identidad y lo importante es de respetar la identidad también, siempre se me hace bien interesante de ver que yo solo soy una representación de tantas representaciones y identidades que hacen Centroamérica. Y mi arte trabaja en una forma de, como en una narrativa de decir una historia. So with my process, I also like to work off of my mistakes and also paralleling that with not forgetting our past or working from our past. You know, language is always changing. We're always learning new ways of how to, you know, properly refer to someone or learning more about our own histories. you know, I often find that, yeah, like I said earlier, that I find that our histories are often pretty hard to access, you know, because of the lack of documenting. So through my work, it's my own way of documenting of, you know, once I leave this earth, once I'm no longer living, you know, being able to leave behind a documentation of that we were here, that we are here, that we have something to contribute, especially within the arts and culture, and showing how rich our culture is. Entonces, lo que yo quiero enseñar con mi arte es una forma de documentación de cuando yo ya no sé, que yo pueda dejar y ser orgullosa de lo que yo estoy dejando con mi arte, de hablar sobre que nosotros existimos y siempre hemos existido y que tenemos algo que construir y siempre hemos contribuido. With always constantly being deprived of not having things accessible, or I remember when I was younger, I would try and, you know, find more about, you know, Central American artists. And I remember specifically one time I typed in Salvadoran artists, or yeah, artists from El Salvador into Google, and all the articles that came up were, you know, Salvador Dali. So even that showed like it was coded in a way that, you know, they only got one word right, and it wasn't even like in the right context. So that even shows like how hard it's been to even access these things of, you know, I would have to go in with like a very direct name. So all of these frustrations go into play of being unapologetic of who I am, of who we are. You know, I want folks when they see my work to be able to identify with it if they've, you know, been excluded from a narrative, from, you know, a mainstream narrative. Entonces también accesando, aprobando de buscar como artes o artistas de El Salvador. Me recuerdo que una vez yo puse en el internet que estaba buscando artistas de El Salvador, y lo único que me salía era artículos de Salvador Dali. Entonces ahí también me enseñaba que era aún más difícil porque ni siquiera era en el contexto que yo estaba aprobando de buscar. Ni siquiera me salieron cosas que estaba buscando. Entonces, si quería buscar algo, tenía que estar preparada como con un nombre exacto. So with that and going through white institutions, it was also pretty hard, you know, to also see that at any level of education, you know, of still consistently getting the same conversations of, you know, what is Central America, or why is this so important, or, you know, having these same questions being asked and asked again. You know, it would just like further cement of why this was so important for me to document and to talk about and to open up these conversations about how much we're lacking of representation, of how little folks know what Central America is and how vast and rich our culture is. Yeah, so my experience with institutions was pretty tough, but it also showed how like resilient our community is. And that's what I really want to evoke with my work, is to show past our trauma, to document that we are, you know, more than, you know, these criminalized ideas that folks have, or victimized, just trying to show the resilience that we have. Entonces lo que yo realmente quiero enseñar con mi arte es la resistencia de nuestra comunidad. Después de tanta trauma y generaciones de pasar de tantas cosas duras, quiero enseñar la resistencia y que personas puedan mirar a mi arte y conectar en una forma que tal vez no se han visto, especialmente en un espacio que normalmente no nos incluyen. So yeah, so thank you for having me, and I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about my work.
Thank you, Kiara. Let's all give her some World Wide Web applauses. I think such a large part about the Central American art movement, if that's what we can call it, is that it's like an I see you moment. Like I see you, you see me. And in looking at your work, I very much felt that with Las Palmas. I remember I have this very fixed memory of going back to Guatemala because that's where my family's from. And me tenían que quitar el susto. And so my grandma took me with some eggs that she pulled out from her backyard to like la curandera del pueblo. And I remember her like praying over me, rubbing the egg all over me, palm leaves and all these things. And then just coming back to the US and having like my non-Latinx friends be like, oh, well, what'd you do this summer? Like, me quitaron el espanto. I don't know how else to put it. You know what I'm saying? So thank you for your work. And I think in regards to our inability, I think as US born Central Americans, our inability to find Central American artists, I think Muriel does such a great job at like being like, hey, we've been out there. So I think that is a good transition to our next presenter, Muriel Hasbin, who is an accomplished artist and educator. And her work focuses on issues of cultural identity, migration, and memory through an intergenerational, transnational, and transcultural lens. Hasbin constructs contemporary narratives and establishes a space for dialogue where individual and collective memory spark new questions about identity, place, and belonging. Hasbin has received numerous distinctions, including representing El Salvador in the Venice Biennial, being a Fulbright Scholar, a Smithsonian Artist Research Fellow, and being awarded the 2019 Archive Transformed CU Boulder Artist Scholar Collaborative Residency. She has received Center Santa Fe's Curator and Producer's Choice Awards, the Howard Chapnick Grant, and the Maryland State Art Council Individual Artist Awards in Media and in Photography. And that's just a few of her accolades. Her work has also been collected and is exhibited internationally at venues such as the Smithsonian American Art Museum in DC, El Museo del Barrio, University of Texas, Lehigh University, Centro Cultural de España en El Salvador, and the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. She's a professor emerita of George Washington University's Corcoran School of the Arts and Design, and is founder and director of Laberinto Projects, a transnational art, culture, and education platform fostering contemporary art practices and social inclusion in El Salvador and its US diaspora. Currently, Hasbin's work is represented by ROFA Project. So let's go ahead and give her a warm virtual welcome, y'all.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Wanda. It's really an absolute pleasure and honor to be here in conversation with Kiara Machado and Beatriz Cortez today, and also to celebrate the work of artists in the exhibition, including some Corcoran alumni, which I'm really proud to say, Veronica Melendez, Kimberly Benavides, Eddie Aldana, and Elizabeth Rodriguez. One of the greatest honors and satisfactions of being a teacher is that, you know, the learning experience can go beyond the classroom, and then it becomes we become part of a community. Quisiera agradecer estar acá. Es un gran honor estar con Kiara Machado y Beatriz Cortés. También tener la oportunidad de celebrar el trabajo de las artistas y los artistas de esta exposición, que incluyen alumnos y alumnas de la Corcoran College of Art and Design, Vero, Kim, Eddie y Ellie. Uno de los grandes honores y satisfacciones del ser profesora es cuando el aprendizaje y el compartir va más allá de las fronteras de la clase y cuando nos volvemos parte de una comunidad. Oops. Sorry. I'd like to dedicate this talk to the Central American children in the United States and in Central America. May they be able to grow up to live their lives feeling represented in our society with justice and equity and together with their families. Quisiera dedicar esta charla a los niños centroamericanos en los Estados Unidos y en Centroamérica que crezcan y vivan sus vidas sintiéndose representados en nuestra sociedad con justicia y equidad junto a sus familias. So I'd like to speak about connected diasporas, and notice that I'm saying diasporas, plural, because I come from a family of immigrants to El Salvador, and then I became an immigrant to the United States. So for me, definitely, it is a very it's a multiplicity of experiences that I carry and that I bring to my own experience as an artist. And so it's this connection and connections that I would like to position in a very kind of in embracing our differences to make part of our belonging. Vengo de una familia de inmigrantes a El Salvador y luego yo me hice inmigrante a Estados Unidos. Tengo una identidad multidiversa e híbrida y me posiciono desde la diferencia para lograr un pertenecer. My father was a photographer and I learned photography from him. His family was originally from Bethlehem, Palestine, and they went to El Salvador at the beginning of World War I, escaping the Ottoman draft. Mi padre fue fotógrafo amateur y aprendí la fotografía de él. Y su familia llegó de Belén, Palestina, a principios de la Primera Guerra Mundial, escapando la conscripción otomana. My mother's family hailed from Poland to France in the 1930s and hid in the little town of Le Mondor during World War II as they barely escaped the Nazis. My mother then went to El Salvador as a young woman and eventually opened the renowned Galería El Laberinto, which you will hear about later in my presentation. La familia de mi madre llegó de Polonia a Francia en los años 30 y se escondieron en el pueblo de Le Mondor durante la Segunda Guerra Mundial, donde apenas escaparon de los nazis. Mi madre fue a El Salvador muy joven, a los 18 años, y eventualmente abrió la reconocida Galería El Laberinto. Both sides of my family have carried a legacy of silence, trauma, and uprooting, be it because of prejudice, persecution, genocide, or war. The family album has become my point of entry into finding out about my family and in a way of reclaiming my history. Ambos lados de mi familia han cargado un legado de silencio, trauma y desarraigo, ya sea por prejuicio, persecución, genocidio o guerra. El álbum de la familia se vuelve mi punto de entrada para aprender sobre la familia y reclamar mi historia. Vengo de pueblos en exilio. I come from peoples in exile. And so I tell my story in pieces because that is how it is, says Edward Said. Santos y Sombras, or Saints and Shadows, is a series of 38 gelatin silver prints that I made in the 1990s, charting the experience of my growing up in El Salvador as a daughter of immigrants who were all those things: Arab, Jewish, Christian, French, Polish, and survivors. I grew up with a sense of what I call the irreconcilable. Contar tu historia en pedacitos, porque así lo es, dijo Edward Said. Trazo mi experiencia como hija de inmigrantes de El Salvador. So my work, and through my work, I have been charting and searching for the land of my terruño, my homeland, where the Palestinian desert and Eastern European ash sift, shift, and blend in the volcanic sands of El Salvador to form the texture of the path in which I define and express my experience. Con este trabajo busco mi terruño, donde las arenas del desierto palestino y las cenizas del este europeo se ciernen, se mueven y se mezclan con las arenas volcánicas del Salvador, creando la textura del camino donde defino y expreso mi vivencia. And I, Muriel Elena, had to be holy. And I, Muriel Elena, and yo, Muriel Elena, tenía que ser santa. The Izalco volcano in El Salvador was spewing lava until shortly before I was born. As a way of giving voice and marking the presence of my Palestinian immigrant family in El Salvador, I made the Izalco recite a Greek Orthodox prayer that my great-grandfather Constantino Costa wrote in his Arabic calligraphy. In the blissful and eternal happiness of heaven, in the name of the pure and immaculate Mother of true light, and all the martyrs and saints. Amen. El volcán de Izalco en El Salvador estaba echando lava hasta poco antes de mi nacimiento. Para darle voz y marcar la presencia de mi familia inmigrante palestina de El Salvador, hice que el Izalco recitara una plegaria griego ortodoxa en árabe escrita por mi bisabuelo Constantino. En la dichosa y eterna felicidad del cielo, en el nombre de la Madre Purísima de Luz Verdadera y todos los mártires y santos. Amén. With solo una sombra, I unearthed the silenced voices of my maternal Jewish family, hoping to regenerate them from burnt ash into glimmering light. A través de mi trabajo fotográfico, descubro y errante rescato el eco de sus voces antes silenciadas, esperando regenerarlas de ceniza a vislumbre. My great-grandfather Georges thought that he was the last and only survivor of his family until he and Esther found each other in 1974. I learned about Esther 20 years after that. Esther survived Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. She told me that a German gave her a little piece of paper and a small pen, and then she wrote those book of poems that you saw in the earlier photograph. Mi abuelo Georges pensaba que él fue el único sobreviviente de su familia hasta que él y Esther se encontraron en 1974. Yo supe de su existencia, la existencia de Esther, 20 años después. Esther sobrevivió a Auschwitz y Bergen-Belsen. How do I do justice to her story? ¿Cómo hago justicia a su vida, a su historia? And so with Saints and Shadows, which was, I made over a decade, I tried to chart that path con Santos y Sombras, que no tenemos tiempo para que las veamos todas, pero las pueden ver en mi sitio web. You can see them in my website. There's not I try to chart that story. But I also tried to tell the story of my mother's hiding during World War II. I journey across the Atlantic Ocean into Europe's history in a search for clues that will help me establish correspondences between the past and the present, the distant and the near, the actual and the imagined, the remembered, the forgotten, the personal, and the public. Cruzo el Océano Atlántico y me adentro en la historia europea, buscando pistas que me ayuden a establecer correspondencias entre el pasado y el presente, lo distante y lo cercano, lo actual y lo imaginado, lo personal y lo público. I weave the story of my mother's hiding in France in the 40s with portraits I made of her while she was recovering in the hospital from a terrible car accident. Tejo la historia de mi madre escondiéndose en Francia en los 40s con retratos que hice de ella mientras estaba en el hospital después de que tuvo un terrible accidente de auto y los imprimo sobre los linos que eran de mi abuela, and I print them on my grandmother's linens. As I photographed in the Auvergne region, I carried two nearly indistinguishable red rocks in my camera bag, one Auvergnat, the other Salvadoran. I wondered, and I still do, how coincidental could it be that my mother chose to settle in a land whose volcanic contour mirrored the place of her childhood refuge. And so you can see them on the ground in the installation. After I finished all of these bodies of work, there were 3 bodies of work. Protegida had 2 parts where I was telling the story from different points of view, depending on who was telling the story or who was telling me the story. I then got this Fulbright Scholar grant to go to El Salvador to implement Terruño detrás del telón, or Backdrop, the search for home. Después de terminar 3 proyectos, Santos y Sombras, Protegida y Protegida Auvergne Toi et Moi, me otorgaron una beca Fulbright para ir a El Salvador a hacer una exposición y un proyecto que era de un proyecto de talleres que se llamaba Terruño detrás del telón. I asked the participants to bring their family photos so that we could tell our stories. Le pedí a los participantes que trajeran sus fotografías y documentos de familia para que pudiéramos contar nuestras historias. Amongst the photographs was this incredible photograph. It took him 3 days to bring this photo. The photo depicts a family wedding with the groom's head torn off. it turns out that after many years later, after they divorced, the grandmother, in a moment of anger, disfigured her ex-husband. Le tomó 3 días traer esta foto. La foto muestra una foto de boda con un novio sin cabeza. En un ataque de ira, después de divorciados, la abuela le arrancó la cabeza. He said as he brought the photograph, and my great-grandfather is el general Hernández Martínez. Y dijo mientras trajo las fotografías, mi bisabuelo dijo, es el general Hernández Martínez. You can imagine that this caused an incredible silence, and people went to different parts of the room because of the fact that this particular wedding family photo was also speaking to El General Martínez, who was a dictator who was responsible for the killing of 10 to 30,000 indigenous people in El Salvador. Este momento en el taller fue un momento terrible y al mismo tiempo pues todo el mundo estaba como en shock y por el hecho de que pues sabemos que el general Martínez es el responsable de la matanza en el cual 10,000 a 30,000 indígenas se fueron masacrados. So I had made this photograph, Todos los Santos, Palestina llega a El Salvador, using the thumbprint on this document. And at the moment when I made it in 97, I thought that this document was just a normal, immigration document, which I hadn't really paid attention to very much. It turns out that Hernández Martínez issued an edict in the 30s that deemed Arab immigrants, amongst others, pernicious, and required my grandfather Elias and all Arab immigrants in El Salvador to have their biographical and biometric information collected into a special registry of foreigners. Hernández Martínez pasó un edicto en el que consideró a los inmigrantes árabes, entre otros, perniciosos, y requirió que mi abuelo Elías y todos los árabes en El Salvador sometieran su información biográfica y biométrica al registro especial de extranjeros. And here you can see my grandfather, my grandmother, and my dad, who was like a little boy in the 30s. These are dated between 33 and 34. So what I suspected that there's a relationship between the personal and the collective was captured in that particular photograph, which is a family photograph, but photographs can tell us a lot. So a personal, intimate drama of the family now becomes the history of a country. Lo que sospechaba, que hay una relación entre lo personal y lo colectivo, está plasmado en esa fotografía de familia. Muestra un drama personal muy íntimo, pero también nos habla de una historia de un país. During these workshops, I also, since I encouraged people to bring their documents and family photos, I also made an installation that was called Barquitos de Papel. Barquitos de Papel showed a video in which my dad and I were making paper boats during the last weeks of his life. And I started doing this because I wanted to speak with him about things. And so I photocopied all these photographs, family photos and documents so that we could have a conversation about things that I still wanted to talk with him about. And during this workshop, what I did was encouraged others to tell their stories and opened it up to create a community. So the paper boats were created, started this whole archive. And right now they're in an installation at the Joni Sawaka Healing Arts Gallery in Washington, DC. So if you are around, you can make an appointment and go into the gallery and make your own paper boat and add to the archive, which has been growing since 2006 until now. A couple of years ago in 2018, I also decided to photograph a selection of these paper boats, and I made them light boxes. I think it was because of the moment that we were living, which was so anti-immigrant, that I wanted to revisit these paper boats and these family stories And they're really beautiful, and they kind of give us a hint about stories. They're private, but they're also public. Another interactive installation that I've done over the years, and especially after I came back from El Salvador, was documented the community blackboard, where I brought some of the photographs that people had given me in El Salvador.
When I first came to the US in 1980, I carried a poem by Salvadoran poet David Escobar Galindo. Para el mundo nacimos con la muerte. To the world we were born with death. In the US, my country had been reduced to being another Vietnam or the next Cuba. But my life had changed drastically because of the violence that was taking over the apparent simplicity of my protected childhood in El Salvador. Respiro jadeando, me muero de miedo. Me cuelgan las almas del lado derecho. English was taking over my consciousness. Del otro costado, I felt like I was losing the language of my terruño, my homeland. I began writing poems, holding on to my childhood memories with dear life. Que amargo me sabe. Añoro los pinos. Es linda la vista, ¿no?
Sí, siempre que vengo en su
Es muy lindo.
su último bosque.
When I went back to El Salvador this past summer, I was able to confront a part of my history that I had not been able to embrace fully as a 17-year-old. ¿De dónde vienes? I was moved by people's stories and amazed by their resilience. ¿Tienes fotografías?
Mi abuela tiene puras tiendas bien alzadas, que no se le terminen rápido.
¿Quiénes son?
Esta es ella. Y este es mi abuelo. Y aquí está.
I encouraged everyone to bring their photos and family documents. Who was a boy of 14, had arrived in El Salvador, avoiding being conscripted. Together, we could share our stories, our secrets.
Aquí es donde llegaron la mayoría de cuerpos quemados.
Como luna suspendida, como luna mi cabeza entre mis brazos hundida. Adelante, sigamos nuestra huella. Migrations unamos nuestra sangre con la sal de nuestro llanto.
Mi papá todo el tiempo, desde que yo me acuerdo, casi siempre vive en Estados Unidos.
To and from Honduras, from Nicaragua, to Costa Rica, Mexico to Cuba.
Ah, ahí está, allá está, ¿eh? Welcome to Intipucá City. ¿Y alguien vive en esta casa, señor?
2 million people and counting.
¿A dónde en Estados? En los Estados, no sabe.
En Virginia.
En Virginia. So as I was saying, I brought some of the photographs that people had given me in El Salvador, and I put them on a wall to start the conversation, and then invited the public to bring more photographs and to just fill up the space. And that's how we documented the community blackboard has become a site, for the exchange of stories, with that sound piece running. And here you see Vero, who participated in the last iteration in 2019 with Veronica Melendez. And then, various stories from people from all over, not only Central Americans, but, people from all of us have immigration stories, be it, a forced or willing kind of migration. Documented la pizarra comunitaria invita al público a llevar sus fotografías y a contribuirlas a este archivo colectivo. Así que con esto nos documentamos. With this, we are documented with our own personal stories. So this brings me to kind of this next part. In 2017, while researching at the Smithsonian Archives of American Art, I encountered 2 recordings of interviews labeled Political Art Documentation, Distribution, Discussion with Unidentified Salvadoran Artists, 1984. Both were conducted by art critic and activist Lucy Lepard during a trip that she made in 1984 to El Salvador as part of the activist campaign Artists Call Against US Intervention in Central America. Unidentified, to find a recording labeled unidentified Salvadoran artist was, to say the least, an unfortunate reality. How did Salvadorans and Salvadoran Americans become unidentified? Are we unworthy of remembrance? Is our history irrelevant? Are our bodies disposable? All of those questions were running through my mind. So Lucy Lepard went to El Salvador in 1984 to bring back knowledge to the United States about something other than war. But in the conversation, as I started listening to it, she states that en Estados Unidos, El Salvador no es que la guerra. In the United States, El Salvador is nothing but war. Indeed, 2 million Salvadorans in the US continue to be represented by reductive and dehumanizing narratives of war, crime, violence, and migratory illegality. And their cultural heritage remains largely unknown or unidentified, despite a substantial history and a persevering and vibrant artistic community. Lucy Lepard fue a El Salvador en el 84 y fue para traer información acerca del Salvador que fuera otra cosa que la guerra. En El Salvador, en Estados Unidos nos dice El Salvador no es que la guerra, no es que la guerra, es solamente la guerra. Y por supuesto, con 2 millones de salvadoreños en los Estados Unidos, continuamos a ser representados por narrativas deshumanizantes de guerra, de crimen y de violencia y de ilegalidad. Y nuestro legado cultural es casi desconocido o no identificado, a pesar de que hay una comunidad artística muy fuerte en El Salvador. Y por supuesto, para mí, mi madre acababa de morir en el 2012 y yo estaba en el proceso de recaudar su archivo de la Galería El Laberinto, y pues sabía de que el laberinto había estado desde 1977 hasta el 2001. And my mother had died in 2012, and I was in the process of trying to recover her archive from the gallery, Galería El Laberinto. And, you know, I knew that the gallery had been very vibrant and practically the art space during the Civil War. Well, it started even in 1977, right before the war, until 2001. Here's the front of the gallery. Unfortunately, Lucy Lepard never went to the gallery, even though in the recording she is urged to go. I had also made recordings of interviews, audio interviews along with my students. Here is Beatriz de León and a group of students interviewing her. And I also had photographed them in the 80s and 90s. Here's a portrait of Rosa Mena Valenzuela that I had made. And here's Carlos Cañas, 1984. And I had also organized, along with my students, this collaborative exhibition that was called Legado y Memoria, Trazando el Laberinto, Legacy and Memory, Mapping the Labyrinth, which had happened in El Salvador in 2015 at the Cultural Center of Spain. También había organizado, junto con mis estudiantes, una exposición que marcaba la historia de la Galería El Laberinto en una exposición que se llamaba Legado y Memoria, Trazando el Laberinto. I've also done an interactive installation that's called Arte Voz, in which I encourage people to react and tell a story to a select group of artworks from Central America, and also to exchange their heartbeats. There's one booth in El Salvador and the other one is in the US. And when it's installed, we send the heartbeats back and forth and you can hear them in the other place. The piece was done in collaboration with Baltasar Portillo, who's a sculptor from El Salvador. And so actually we're kind of running out of time, so I'm gonna move forward. But so the site in El Salvador is a site for learning and recognizing, remembering, reconciling, learning ourselves, healing. It's an arts, education, and cultural platform that fosters art practices, legacy preservation, dialogue between El Salvador, Central America, and its diaspora. And we've done workshops at the site where my mother lived the last 10, 20 years of her life. And here are some art workshop participants. And one of the workshops that I taught was the artist and the archive. And as part of that, we visited the Archivo General de la Nación, where I discovered these seismic registers, which are absolutely fascinating. Como parte de estos talleres, o sea, he hecho varios, hemos reunido a muchas personas de Centroamérica, artistas, de Estados Unidos y de Centroamérica que se reúnen en El Salvador, y como parte de uno de los talleres fuimos al Archivo General de la Nación, donde yo descubrí los registros sísmicos de El Salvador, que recientemente he estado trabajando para crear un nuevo registro visual en el cual incorporo los registros sísmicos y luego también los superpongo con imágenes de obras de artistas y también con mis propias fotografías de esa época. So I've been recently, since I've been working on this in the last few years, well, really the first time that I photographed there was in November of 2019. And then this year in February, I photographed at the archive, at the National Archives in El Salvador, the seismic registers. And I decided to incorporate images from the archive of El Laberinto, from the artists that worked during this time, as well as images that I made during the time, photographs, like looking through my photographic negatives. And I've created this new body of work, which I am in the process of working right now. So I'm going to show you a few images and then we can move on to Beatriz. But as you can see here, there's like these images that come from the registers that are like really amazing. And then the images of by other artists, like here in this case, Julio Sequeira, for example. Others are just the registers. Here you see La Novia, which is composed of my mother's wedding dress and Rosamena Valenzuela's image, painting La Novia. Or these landscapes. Or here, which juxtaposes part of a painting by Carlos Cañas, along with my own back, like a self-portrait from the 80s. No registra temblor, doesn't register any earthquakes, is an homage to Armando Campos. And you see that little ant kind of traveling through. I also incorporate some of my mother's writings about the artists. And here is a little peek into some of the writing about Rosamena Valenzuela, and it's called Exotismo al revés. También incorporo documentos de lo que escribió mi madre acerca de los artistas. And then there's these strange apparitions in the seismograph themselves, like this body that is kind of floating there. And it's really amazing how that I started to see these kind of strange images that were kind of latent in the seismograph. That's it. Thank you so much.
Muriel, and I just want to thank you so much for having coffee with me a couple years ago, and I was fresh out of college and coming back home. And I want to say that your work still continues to be an inspiration today as I embark on my own research in my own creative work as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
For that wonderful reminder. Up next, we have Beatriz Cortés, who, like Muriel, is thinking about memory. And so Beatriz is a visual artist and a cultural critic. Born in El Salvador, she migrated to the United States in 1989. Her work explores simultaneity, life in different temporalities, and different versions of modernity, particularly as it relates to memory and an exploration of possible futures. She has shown her work nationally and internationally. And recently, in 2019, she received the Freeze Life Water Inaugural Sculpture Prize, and in 2020, the Artadia Award Los Angeles. She holds a master's in fine arts from the California Institute of the Arts and a doctorate in Latin American literature from Arizona State University. She currently teaches in the Department of Central American and Transborder Studies at California State University, Northridge, and lives and works in Los Angeles. Join me in welcoming Beatriz.
Thank you so much. Let's see. Can you see my PowerPoint? And can you hear me? Okay. Yes. Thank you so much for this invitation. It's an honor for me to be here today. And I would like to thank, voy a empezar hablando en español, dar las gracias a la Casa de la Cultura del Salvador y a los colegas también del Departamento de Español y Portugués de la Universidad de Maryland por esta invitación tan generosa a dialogar con todos ustedes esta tarde. Es un honor compartir este panel con Muriel y con Chiara y también contar con Wanda en esta conversación y celebrar los artistas de la exhibición. So, muchas gracias. I want to thank the Casa de la Cultura en El Salvador and the colleagues of the Department of Spanish and Portuguese at the University of Maryland in College Park for this generous invitation to dialogue with all of you today. It is an honor to share this panel with Muriel and with Chiara and to have Wanda here as our moderator. Thank you so much. A grandes rasgos, mi obra es sobre la memoria de crecer en la guerra en El Salvador y sobre mis experiencias de migración a medida que me mudé primero a Arizona, donde viví por 11 años, antes de llegar a Los Ángeles en el año 2000 por vía de Detroit. In general terms, my work is about the memory of growing up in the Civil War in El Salvador and about my experiences of migration as I moved first to Arizona, where I lived for almost 11 years before coming to Los Angeles via Detroit. Pero mi obra es también sobre la experiencia de simultaneidad, que es un concepto del que yo quisiera hablar el día de hoy, porque me parece como una especie de superpoder que tienen los migrantes para estar en dos diferentes temporalidades, vivir en dos diferentes lugares a la vez, en mi caso en San Salvador y Los Ángeles, existiendo en dos o más, pero diferentes versiones de la modernidad, coexistiendo en diferentes formas de ver el mundo, moviéndome entre diferentes tecnologías. Pero más importante aún, mi obra es sobre el futuro. Construyo memoria para poder imaginar posibles futuros. But my work is about the experience of simultaneity, being in two different time frames, living in two places at once, San Salvador and Los Angeles. Existing in two or more but different versions of modernity, in different cultural worldviews, moving back and forth within different technologies. And more importantly, my work is about the future. I build memories so I can imagine possible futures. Por esta razón, hay tres conceptos que son centrales en mi obra: el tiempo, la simultaneidad y el movimiento. Y estoy interesada en cómo los asuntos raciales, los asuntos de clase, las historias de migración o los conceptos de género interceptan o atraviesan esos tres conceptos. Because of these, there are three concepts that are central to my work: time, simultaneity, and movement. And I'm interested in how issues of race, class, migration, gender intercept or cut through these concepts. El tiempo se ha vuelto un concepto central en mi obra también, particularmente mis esfuerzos por romper cronologías. Time has become a central concept in my work, particularly my effort to break with chronologies. For example, cuando reconstruí una versión miniatura de mi habitación de infancia que vemos aquí, para hacer, era un video, estas son dos stills del video, pues mi objetivo era construir una memoria, revisitar ese lugar que había tenido que abandonar sin tomar una fotografía de él, un lugar que había sido tan importante para mí y que me había sido quitado por las circunstancias, pero también hablar sobre el paso del tiempo, sobre la riqueza de la vida que sigue fluyendo. So for instance, I didn't know this then, but when I reconstructed a miniature version of my childhood bedroom to make a video piece, my objective was to construct memory, to revisit a place that had been taken from me, but also to talk about the passing of time and about the lushness of life that continues moving forward. Una vez que completé esta pieza, pude ver que había insertado en ella un par de cosas del presente que no eran posibles en mi pasado. La jaula de mi loro Vladimiro y las imágenes de Monseñor Romero. En otras palabras, desde mucho antes de pensarlo, comencé a hacer intervenciones en el orden cronológico del tiempo. And once I had completed the piece, I was able to see that I had inserted there a couple of things from my present that could not be possible in my past. My parrot's cage and images of Bishop Romero, in other words, even before thinking about it, I had made interventions in the chronological order of time. Cuando construí una escultura con tierra y semillas, que era para honrar la memoria de los muertos, especialmente de las muertas, que habían sido tiradas como basura en la guerra y en la migración, y la regué todos los días hasta que se convirtió en un jardín, no me daba cuenta, pero entonces también estaba honrando a alguien que no estaba ahí, es decir, estaba cruzando las barreras del tiempo y del espacio, estaba jugando con el concepto de la convivencia a destiempo. When I built a sculpture with soil and seeds that was meant to honor the unknown dead who have been thrown like trash in war and migration, and I watered it every day until it became a garden, I did not realize that I was honoring someone who was not there at the moment, and that I was crossing barriers of time and space and was already playing with the concept of the untimely. Y también pensando en el pasado de la guerra, construí instalaciones con libros, instalaciones que eran sobre la memoria de vivir en la guerra, en un contexto de censura y especialmente de autocensura, de violencia y de miedo. I have built installations with books, installations that were about the memory of living in the war, about censorship, about violence, about living in fear. I began burning books and burying books as people did with their own books during the war in El Salvador, so that they wouldn't become the targets of violence. Pero construí estas instalaciones con los libros que tengo ahora en mis repisas. Escondí los libros que me parecía podrían ser censurados ahora si la guerra sucediera en estos momentos y en nuestro contexto. But I built those installations with the books that I have today in my library. I hid the books that I thought would be banned today if the war happened in our own context. Y cuando construí una armadura para Rufina Maya, and when I built an armor made of steel for Rufina Maya, una mujer que fue valiente, que fue la única sobreviviente de una masacre que ocurrió en 1981 en El Mozote, en El Salvador, 3 días después de que yo cumpliera 11 años. Yo lo que quería era protegerla en 1982, cuando ella en realidad necesitaba esa armadura para circular su memoria. A woman who was the only survivor of a massacre that happened in 1981 in the town of El Mozote in El Salvador, a day after I turned 11. I wanted to protect her in 1982 when she really needed the armor. Pero yo entonces era una niña y no pude haberle hecho una. Así que le hice una para atravesar el tiempo y el espacio, aunque ella ya no está con nosotros y sus testimonios siguen en devenir a través de YouTube hoy día. And I wasn't able to make her one when I was a kid. And I wanted to protect her memory, even though she's no longer here. And her testimonies continue unfolding through YouTube today, without my help, of course. También el medio ambiente ha sido importante, una fuente importante de metáforas para mi trabajo. Esta fotografía la tomó Walterio Iraeta, así que le doy las gracias. Incluso trabajando con acero industrial, mi gesto es de regresar este material industrial que ha sido extraído artificialmente de la tierra, regresarlo a ella, reconocerlo como material orgánico. Also, the environment has been an important source of metaphors in my work. Even as I work with industrial steel, I'm gesturing towards returning the industrial material that was artificially extracted from the earth back to the land as organic material. Sin embargo, es a través de mi trabajo con las plantas que he comprendido que nuestra marca sobre el planeta no solamente ha sido escrita en las capas de sedimentación o sobre la piedra, sino también en el medio ambiente vivo, y me parece muy importante las plantas, como decía Chiara en su presentación. Después de todo, un jardín es una composición artificial hecha con plantas, una forma de intervención humana con contenido histórico y cultural. Las plantas me han permitido construir metáforas sobre eugenesia, mano de obra, migración, hibridez, conocimientos antiguos y otras cosas. However, it is through my work with plants that I have understood that our mark on this planet is not only written on the sedimentation layers or on the rock, but also on the living environment. After all, a garden is an artificial arrangement of plants, a form of human intervention with cultural and historical content. Plants have allowed me to build metaphors about eugenics, about labor, about migration hybridity, ancient knowledge, and others. Yo considero que mi pensamiento es de la familia de Luciana, por mi interés en explorar ideas como el nomadismo y el rechazo a existir dentro de los rígidos diagramas de la identidad. Por esta razón, mi obra no trata sobre mi propia vida ni sobre mi propia identidad, ni tengo un apego a conceptos rígidos de la identidad como ser salvadoreña, salvadoreña americana, Central American American, ni tampoco de la generación 1.5, de la generación número 2, ni ninguna de esas cosas clasificatorias de la identidad. Más bien, para mí el concepto de la diáspora centroamericana es uno que no conocemos todavía, es decir, no existe todavía más que como un futuro, un devenir que estamos construyendo en estos momentos nosotros mismos. El movimiento se ha convertido en una idea central en mi pensamiento. For many years, I have considered myself a Deleuzian thinker. For me, being a nomad is conceptually exemplified by the idea of refusing to exist within the given diagrams of identity. For this reason, my work is not about my own life or about my own identity, and is not concerned with rigid concepts of identity or classifying identities. Rather, for me, even a vague concept such as the Central American diaspora is one that we have yet to invent. It's an open concept that exists only as part of the future in becoming. In other words, movement has become a central idea in my thinking, one that brought together my theoretical framework and my life experiences. Crecer en la guerra fue un gran peso por muchos años sobre mi práctica artística, especialmente ya que el proceso de la guerra no tuvo un final simbólico. No hubo reconocimiento de lo que ocurrió. No hubo disculpas hacia las víctimas. No hubo justicia. Growing up in a war weighs heavily over my artistic practice, especially since it has not had a symbolic end, since there hasn't been a recognition of what violence took place, no contrition on the part of those responsible, no justice. Pero a la vez un día me di cuenta de que era complicado hacer una obra de forma obsesiva sobre un momento particular del pasado y a la vez ser una intelectual sobre el nomadismo y sobre el movimiento. One day, I realized that it was complicated to bring together work that was invested in a particular moment of the past to coincide with a philosophical framework related to movement and that was central to my thinking. Es decir, me di cuenta que el pasado también estaba abierto. That is, I realized that the past is also open. Un día me imaginé una conversación con el filósofo Gilles Deleuze. Me imaginé que él me reclamaba que yo había decidido convertir un momento del pasado, un momento fijo, la guerra, en el elemento central no solo de mi obra, sino también de mi vida. And so I imagined an untimely conversation with Deleuze. He complained that I had decided to make a moment in the past, the war, the central element in my work, the central element in my life. And I quote, cito, el momento más importante de tu vida ya pasó, me imaginé que me decía. Yo soy un pensador sobre el futuro y vos sos una pensadora del pasado, imaginé que me decía. Y fue en ese momento de crisis, de cuestionar mi propia forma de abordar la guerra y la memoria, que el futuro se convirtió en un elemento central de mi labor como artista. The most important moment in your life already happened. I imagine that he said. I'm a thinker of the future and you're a thinker of the past, I imagine that he said. And this is how a moment of crisis, a moment when I question my own way of engaging with the war, and building memory that the future became a central element in my work. Fue así que el concepto del tiempo y la habilidad de intervenir en el orden cronológico del tiempo adquirió una gran importancia para mí. As a result, the concept of time and the ability to intervene in the chronological order of time became important in my work. Uno de los filósofos que me impactó en ese sentido fue Peter Osborne, porque él cuestiona la imposición de la modernidad como una forma de establecer una cronología y como una narrativa universal del tiempo. One of the philosophers who has impacted my understanding of time is Peter Osborne, because he questions the imposition of modernity as a way to establish a chronology and a universal narrative of time. Él dice que el esfuerzo de establecer una narrativa sobre la modernidad que va hacia el progreso, entre comillas, en itálicas, hacia el desarrollo, entre comillas, en itálicas, es también un esfuerzo por colonizar y homogenizar o borrar la diversidad. He argues that the effort to establish a narrative about modernity towards progress, quote unquote, towards development, quote unquote, is also a colonial and homogenizing effort to erase diversity. Entonces, en vez de cronologías, Osborne está interesado en explorar diferentes modernidades que coexistan de forma simultánea. So rather than a chronology, Osborne is interested in the exploration of different modernities coexisting simultaneously. Algunas ideas sobre el realismo especulativo, lo poshumano, las filosofías de la extinción me invitaron a considerar la imposición del humanismo, pero también del liberalismo, de la ilustración como la única forma, la forma colonial de concebir la razón, de concebir el tiempo. En cambio, me empezaron a interesar otras formas de pensar el tiempo, formas circulares de comprender el tiempo, formas antiguas de concebir el tiempo, la multiplicidad, la simultaneidad, ideas about speculative realism, the posthuman, philosophies of extinction, invited me to consider the imposition of seeing humanism, liberalism, the Enlightenment as the only way, the colonial way, to understand reason, and with it to understand time. Instead, I became interested in other ways of understanding time, circular conceptual constructions of time, multiplicity, simultaneity. Por ejemplo, en esta pieza que vemos aquí, la máquina del tiempo, the time machine, tiene capacidades simultáneas que evocan la ciudad de Los Ángeles y la ciudad de San Salvador bajo la misma luz. Yo lo que hice fue construir este pequeño cuarto y proyecté un video de Los Ángeles visto desde el Griffith Park, que está en el centro de Los Ángeles, en el panel exterior. Y abrí miles de agujeros con diferentes brocas de taladro que me permitieron crear un video con tecnología rudimentaria para la vista de San Salvador de noche que se aprecia desde un columpio en el interior de la instalación. For instance, I built a time machine with simultaneous capabilities that evoke the city of Los Angeles and the city of San Salvador with the same light. I projected a video of Los Angeles viewed from Griffith Park on the exterior panel, and I opened thousands of holes with different drill bits that allowed me to create a video with rudimentary technology for the night view of San Salvador in the interior space of the installation that one can view from a swing. I also began to experiment with play, with the idea of play, and this is how I made the beast. A pinball machine brought back to life from an old abandoned playing field, rebuilt with both mechanical and new Arduino technologies. It showed a crumbling modernity underneath and a new version of modernity on top. También comencé a experimentar con la idea del juego como una manera de explorar, salirse de la razón moderna. Y entonces empecé a pensar sobre la idea de jugar como una manera de escapar momentáneamente esa idea de la razón moderna y pensar en cambio en una manera de existir, por ejemplo, en la simultaneidad. Esta máquina con una lógica circular donde una bola atraviesa un campo que está marcado por obstáculos relacionados con la migración y con muchas veces cuando la persona que está jugando intenta interactuar con la máquina e intenta mantener la bola en el campo porque no quiere perder, no quiere que su turno se termine. Y cuando eventualmente es expulsada o deportada del campo, esa persona quiere jugar de nuevo y la máquina todavía está ahí, lista para otro intento y además de forma gratuita. Así que los espectadores continúan enviando la bola dentro del campo y colaborando colectivamente para mantener a ese inmigrante dentro del campo, un esfuerzo a la vez. So it was this machine with a circular logic where a ball traverses a field marked by the obstacles of immigration. And as much as the person playing attempts to keep the ball in the field, it is eventually expelled or deported from the field. But the machine is there, ready for another try. And so the spectators continue to send the ball in and collaborate collectively in keeping the ball in the play field, one effort at a time. This piece, which engages with a history of migration and deportation, also examines through play the life of immigrants as impacted by chance and by forces outside the control. Entonces, la vida de los migrantes impactada por el azar y la idea de que las fuerzas que controlan nuestras vidas están fuera de nuestro control. También empecé a experimentar con las ideas con la lava y con las ideas sobre la extinción y comencé a leer sobre lo no humano, sobre el futuro después de los humanos, particularmente a través de la obra de una filósofa que también trabaja con la literatura, Claire Colebrook, y acepté su invitación para imaginar un geólogo no humano del futuro que leería nuestra marca sobre el planeta y comencé a pensar sobre la extinción y a leer sobre lo no humano y sobre un futuro después de los humanos, particularmente a través de la obra de ella, y acepté la invitación que nos hacía ella para imaginar un geólogo no humano, una máquina, yo me imagino como uno de esos rovers que andan por Marte, que es el geólogo del futuro leyendo nuestra marca sobre el planeta. Este geólogo no humano del futuro se dedica a leer los sedimentos, las piedras, buscando los trazos del antropoceno, buscando los trazos de la vida humana sobre el planeta. Y ese geólogo no humano del futuro, al leer los sedimentos sobre las piedras, se confundiría porque un volcán haciendo erupción escupiría sobre el presente, capas del pasado, y sobre el futuro, capas del pasado, llevándolo a romper cronologías, ¿no? And so I began to work with the idea of extinction and to read the work of Claire Colebrook. And I accepted her invitation to imagine a geologist of the future, a machine geologist that I was imagining as a rover, one of those rovers that walk through Mars. And this rover would read the sedimentation layers on the rock, but I was interested in thinking about the landscape of El Salvador as the landscape that I know as home, populated by volcanoes, and thinking that these volcanoes would be erupting and spitting out layers of the past onto the present, layers of the past onto the future, onto different moments, confusing completely this machine geologists of the future that's trying to read the chronologies in the sedimentation layers. Y así fue como un material que para mí era tan lleno de memoria, tan lleno de dolor, porque los campos de lava eran los campos donde se dejaban abandonados los cuerpos de los desaparecidos, los cuerpos mutilados y torturados de los desaparecidos, también adquirió otros significados. And it was like this, that lava, a material that was so filled with, embedded with memory, a material that that also was the landscape of the killing fields where the bodies, the mutilated bodies of the disappeared were thrown during the war, acquired other different meanings. And also I wanted to mention that this image that you see here is an image of Marcador. This piece, esta pieza Marcador, cairn, fue construida de una manera como los pueblos indígenas construyeron en el pasado, y me interesaba mucho porque en vez de tener cemento, goma, arcilla, la pieza está sostenida por el planeta, por la gravedad. So I was really interested in how a piece like this, instead of being glued together by cement or, I don't know, some kind of mixture of sand and other things, or by glue or by other things, it was really just supported by the planet, by the forces of gravity that sustain it. This is inside Rafa Esparza's Figure Ground Beyond the White Field. Entonces es dentro de la instalación de Rafa Esparza que él construyó con adobe para invitar a otros artistas a hacer una Brown Exhibition, hacer una exhibición de gente Latinx, que también era un comentario sobre cómo no hay una representación apropiada de estos artistas en las instituciones importantes del país. Pero quisiera también hablar sobre Tzolk'in. I would like to speak about Tzolk'in, a piece that I made as a result of, first as a result of an invitation that I received, a commission from Clock Shop, an arts organization here in Los Angeles, to make this piece by the LA River. But then I also received an invitation at the same time to participate in Made in LA in the biennial in Los Angeles. And so I decided to make 2 Tzolk'ins. And I want to show you quickly because I'm running out of time. Aquí está el Tzolk'in que se encuentra en el Hammer Museum, y aquí en la pared podemos ver un video que conecta con el otro Tzolk'in que está en el río. So these Tzolk'ins, these pieces that I made as a result of an invitation from Clock Shop and also from the Made in LA biennial in Los Angeles, were separated by 22 miles across the city, one protected by an institution, the other one outdoors, unprotected in an abandoned field by the LA River in an industrial park. And these pieces were inspired by the ancient Mayan calendar for agriculture. That's a calendar that's filled with futurity because it's the calendar used to tell people's destiny. Estaban basadas en el calendario maya de la agricultura, que es un calendario que se usa para decir el destino de las personas, pero al moverse este engranaje gira alrededor del otro engranaje, pero también cada uno de los dientes de este engranaje se mueve de forma lineal. Así que es un engranaje que habla sobre la simultaneidad porque se mueve de forma lineal y circular a la vez. También este hace algo así, pero voy a seguir hablando de Tzolk'in para apurarme. Entonces, desde el río se comunicaban, so from the river, these 2 pieces communicated with each other across town. Y para mí eso era muy importante porque no solamente me recordaba cuando yo era niña, como mis padres, como mis hermanos ya se habían ido del país, los llamaban y trataban de seguir siendo padres a la distancia porque mis hermanos estaban en Estados Unidos y ellos estaban en El Salvador conmigo. So I remember being little and seeing my parents trying to be parents at the distance because my brothers were in the United States and my parents were with me in El Salvador. But I also, it also makes me think about, the separation of families, how nuestras familias están separadas por fronteras. Our families are separated by borders, and also this communication across the distance, especially when the quarantine began. Cuando comenzó la cuarentena me di cuenta que realmente hemos estado en cuarentena por 40 años, that we have been in quarantine for 40 years, that Salvadoran families and Central American families have not been able to be together and celebrate together our important moments, just like in this quarantine, since we had to separate. Así como en esta cuarentena hemos tenido que estar separados por muchísimo tiempo. Entonces, después moví los Tzolk'ins a Nueva York, y por ejemplo, en este caso están frente al East River, pero también están separados en el parque por una distancia considerada, y para mí fue muy importante también llevarlos a este lugar, que era un lugar cercano a Astoria, donde mis padres habían vivido como inmigrantes antes que yo naciera. Entonces, por eso para mí era un lugar significativo, porque en ese lugar no había obras sobre la migración centroamericana en el tiempo que ellos vivían en Nueva York, y para mí era importante poner unas esculturas que hablaran sobre esa vida. Y entonces Hay muchas otras obras que he hecho, por ejemplo, en este caso sobre los niños migrantes, hacer las camas cósmicas que reflejan sobre las paredes un cosmos con tiras con listones hechos con las cobijas que los niños tienen en los detention centers, y con chain link y con acero, que son los 3 materiales que ellos los rodean en los detention centers, que con los mismos materiales, with the same materials that we have in the detention centers, we could build another world. Podríamos construir otro mundo con esos mismos materiales. Y entonces así fue que empecé a pensar estas instalaciones que por un lado pues eran conversaciones con los pueblos indígenas de Centroamérica, con los mayas, con Joya de Serén, con las construcciones de iglús en el Polo Norte, pensando como muchas de las construcciones que nosotros imaginamos como modernas, thinking a lot about how the constructions and the structures that we imagine as modern really were designed by indigenous peoples, fueron diseñadas por pueblos indígenas millones, bueno, siglos, digamos, de años antes que nosotros pensáramos siquiera en tener patentes, que en tener copyrights y todas esas cosas. Entonces, era también como una conversación con un, it was also a conversation with an architect, con un arquitecto, Buckminster Fuller, aquí en Los Ángeles, que él tenía las patentes de todos los geodesic domes que él había diseñado, por no haberle dado crédito a los pueblos indígenas, ¿no? It was also a conversation with Buckminster Fuller, and you know that he had the patents to all these geodesic domes that he had designed, and which are amazing, and at the same time that you know, by that act of having the patents, the credit of the indigenous peoples designing so many of these geodesic domes in ancient times also was not given to them. And so también empecé a pensar en el caso de esta instalación en Marfa, sobre estar en un espacio donde está la Border Patrol, porque aquí son los headquarters de la Border Patrol, además de ser un pueblo que apoya a tantos inmigrantes. Entonces era como una forma de entrar en conversación con Chamberlain y con Donald Judd, pero también de entrar en conversación con la Border Patrol y de darle shelter a los inmigrantes que estaban siendo capturados prácticamente al otro lado de la calle de este lugar. Y bueno, y finalmente quería mostrar mi participación en una colaboración que tuvimos durante este verano con 80 artistas, una colaboración que se llamaba In Plain Sight, que fue organizada por Rafa Esparza y Castles. So I wanted to tell you about this collaboration In Plain Sight that was organized by Castles and Rafa Esparza, that included the collaboration of 80 artists. This is my piece over Los Angeles, No Cages, No Jaulas, que es un homenaje a los niños en los centros de detención, y que fue realmente conmovedor ver a los aviones escribir esta oración en el cielo, porque generalmente el cielo se corporatiza, because it was moving to see the planes writing this statement on the sky, because the sky has become corporate, and it's easier to see an advertisement for insurance than to see a statement that so meaningful to all of us. And so it was a way to take over the sky over Los Angeles for 10 minutes, but 10 minutes that have been really solidified in our memory, 10 minutos que recordaremos. Y aquí hay algunos otros ejemplos. My pain is so big, lo dijo la hermana del primer migrante que murió de COVID, que era salvadoreño. It's not your fault, lo escribió Sky Hopinka sobre la frontera por Nuevo Laredo. Stop Immigration Now, Bambi Salcedo sobre el MacArthur Park. Your tax dollars cage kids. La frontera nos cruzó. Rafa Esparza en la frontera de San Diego y Tijuana. No More Camps sobre el Santa Anita Detention Center, que lo escribió Karen Ishizuka en el lugar donde muchos miembros de la comunidad japonesa habían incluso nacido y sido detenidos durante la Segunda Guerra Mundial. And Shame, Defund Hate sobre el Geo Group, que es una corporación que se beneficia, que lucra de tener los inmigrantes en los detention centers. So In Plain Sight, you can check it out, go to XMAP, and you will be able to see it. But during that time, we also had the opportunity to make a mural in collaboration with the Central American community organizations, Salef, Clínica Romero, El Rescate, Maya Visión, Carecen, Endilón y Carpi, y juntos hicimos este mural de yeso junto al Parque MacArthur para poder denunciar que ICE no solamente pues está maltratando a los inmigrantes, sino también incluso esterilizándolos, ¿no? Y bueno, aquí tenemos la última pieza que hicimos ese día. Esa es la colaboración de las community organizations. Ellos lo escribieron sobre la frontera con los aviones, pero lo dejaron de forma permanente, en forma virtual, sobre el MacArthur Park. No tendremos miedo, escrito en maya quiché. Como ya no tengo tiempo, voy a terminar ahí. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Beatriz. Se le agradece mucho.
Thank you.
And in reality, I had a set of questions that I was going to ask, but your conversation around modernity and living in simultaneity has me like, well, should I ask those questions? But I will give them a try. It looks like we may have some questions from the audience, and so why don't we start there? A question for all the artists is, which of your pieces do you feel have the greatest impact or the strongest message?
I can go first. So I feel it's kind of hard to choose just one painting, but I feel that maybe like one of my first ones where I really cemented what I was going to, I guess what cemented me from like the subject matter, or I guess like the style in which I really grew comfortable with, which was, it's titled 40, and it was in honor of 41 young girls who died in an orphanage in Guatemala City. And it was kind of like also kind of talking about how, you know, atrocities that happen don't really get like worldwide recognition in comparison to like, you know, when Notre Dame burned, and like the very next day, like a billionaire had given up money to get like for it to get reconstructed. And as like sad as it was, you know, it was already it already had funds to get reconstructed, versus like other things, you know, where lives are being taken, you know, and like just to see how like property is more valued than lives, you know, we even see that right now with like Black Lives Matter. So I think for myself, it would be the piece of 40.
Beatriz or Muriel, do you all have a response or an idea as to what piece is the most impactful for you?
No, I think that's a really hard question, because each piece has its moment and a reason for being, and you know, I can't respond to how the public responds. You know, I can only say what it means to me in terms of my development, you know, like my path, my journey as an artist, and what it is that I'd like to say. So each moment, you know, feels like it's really important, and each piece kind of has its impact personally. So yeah, it's hard to choose. I don't know if it's meant for like trying to figure out what the audience or the public, you know, how the public sees the work, which I think is a difficult question for us as artists being on this. You know, we always welcome feedback, but we can't guess what people are thinking.
Yeah, I agree with Muriel, and I also think that I mean, pieces are not solid and rigid in time. They continue acquiring meanings, and they continue unfolding, and I have no idea where they're gonna get, and I never think about them in comparison with one another. Or
right, they're like children.
They have a life of their own.
Mm-hmm.
Another question that I think that I found striking also from the audience is, the question that they say, all three of you straddle serious stories while also working to reject the popular image of Central Americans as victims, so often seen in the US media. How do you find that balance? And I think this relates back to the conversation that our keynote speaker, Mauricio Ramirez, I believe, was commenting on how the Central American subject in the United States is often presented either as war-torn, as both Beatriz and Muriel have pointed to, or as a criminal, as a poor undocumented person at the border, as a child losing their parents, all these horrific images. So how do we strike that balance between communicating the racial violence and the gendered violence that's committed against Central Americans, while also not holding to that archetype?
Well, maybe I can start digging into this question. For me, not all my work is about Central America at all. And so the way that I address this, because I definitely don't think Central American people are victims, is that when I make something about Central American people, I try to honor them, and I make the most beautiful thing I can. But I also, when I have conversations with important philosophers, thinkers, scholars, other artists, collaborations, etc., I always try to address them as equals, especially when I'm talking to philosophers who are in other time frames, in other moments in time and space, as equals, to bring the context of El Salvador to speak as equals with other contexts and other ideas, rather than to follow a colonizing history or to contribute to it. I think that that's what I see also in all the artists in the panel, addressing different contexts and different times as equals.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think that, there's a difference between objectifying and using your own subjectivity to be able to speak about something. And so, we're not interested in objectifying anybody, because that's not what we do as artists. We are human beings that live in a collective, and we are trying to be part of, a community. And it's not that it wouldn't even, I don't think that it would be something that we would want to do, because that would be like a disrespect towards ourselves, like we are who we are, and we are proud of who we are, and like Beatriz says, like we are equals in this conversation with the world. So yeah, that's what it is. It's about humanizing people, because we are humans, all of us. So
yeah, I think just to add on to what Muriel and Beatriz have said, I think it's also because most of the times that they are showing these very horrific images or talking about us, it's about also questioning and like seeing who is talking about us. It's like folks who don't know or aren't like really aware, we are so much more than this trauma. Like Beatriz said, like we're very resistant, very resilient community. So I think it just comes from like lived experience of like, I know that, we're so much more than all these things. And yeah, we definitely are not victims, but, survivors. And we're obviously still living, so we're able to talk about our own living experiences.
Thank you all. Now, I think we have time for maybe one more question, and this is kind of a selfish question. Because as I am particularly interested in the archives of Central American people, undocumented Central Americans. And so when I look at all of your works, I do think of you all as archivists of the past, of the present, and the future. And so I'm curious as to who or what inspired you to document or to conceive of of a Central American experience, now, past, and future, like thinking across temporalities to honor Beatriz's simultaneity.
I think we're archive junkies, ¿verdad, Muriel?
De plano. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a fascination with documentation because it's kind of a way to enter questions, you know, it's like, I mean, we're researchers as artists. We want to understand where we are, who we are in relation to the world, you know, and documentation serves as an entry point. So it's a way of understanding the world and to positing questions about where we have been and where we're going.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, since I'm playing with the idea of time, opening an archive or opening a book is an opportunity to read creatively each time. And so it's a way to create or co-create with the context of whatever it is that you're looking at. And so whatever we document or we leave, como decía Kiara, cuando nos vayamos, que vamos a dejar las cosas aquí, ¿no? It will be for others to open and play with those things. And I think that there's something really beautiful about making things that are in conversation with the past and making things that are in conversation with the future, even though we probably won't be there, but somebody else will, and they will probably not always say what we intended to say. They will say something even more interesting because it will be another time.
Yeah,
Thank you all. Please, Kiara.
Oh, just really quick. Yeah, just, it's definitely just being able to leave something positive behind, not even something positive, but like Beatriz said, it's like for other folks to be able to see it and like dissect it. And also it's just, just kind of like a little paper trail, but in my sense of like paintings, of being able to like reference back to it and reflect on it.
Yeah, and I'll say something really personal, just kind of about photography, you know, kind of, so since I was little, I was always amazed when I was on the beach, how you would walk on the sand, you know, on that black volcanic sand, and you had your footprints, and then a wave would come and it was gone, you know, and it was always this kind of the ephemerality of things that I always found really poignant. And in terms of photography, I've always found that, you know, it's a way of capturing the light that hit, you know, that surface or that person and is now with us. And so it's kind of a poetic and like, you know, just a way of capturing reality, or like to hold it, you know, hold it for a moment. And like Beatriz said, recreate it to mean something for us, to create meaning. So I think that would be my answer also in terms of documents.
I think that's a beautiful way to end the Q&A. I want to thank all of you for sharing your time with us, all the way from Los Angeles to San Gabriel Valley to DC. Thank you guys. I appreciate it so much. And I will hand this over to Tara.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Tara Youngborg, and I am the manager of the Stamp Gallery. And I wanted to say thanks to everyone who's watching. Thanks for tuning in and taking the time to watch. Gracias a todos. Thank you to Jeanette, Wanda, Kiara, Muriel, and Beatriz for wonderful talks. It was so great to learn about all of your practices and very inspiring. I also want to thank our curator for Connected Diaspora, U.S. Central American Visuality in the Age of Social Media, Veronica Melendez, and also our collaborator and co-organizer, Dr. Ana Patricia Rodriguez. She's a faculty in the School of Languages, Literatures, and Cultures, and without her, all of the really wonderful keynotes and artist panels would not have been possible. Thanks to all of our co-hosts for this exhibition, the School of Languages, Literatures, and Cultures, the Department of Spanish and Portuguese at the University of Maryland, La Casa de la Cultura El Salvador with Jeanette. And I have some great news. The exhibition will be extended. It's now going to be on view through December 12th, physically at the Stamp in the Stamp Union. So we have reservation only hours. You can find out all of the information, including our hours, at our website, stamp.umd.edu/gallery. And for everyone joining us remotely, you can visit our website or our social media, and stay tuned for previews of our exhibition as well as recordings of all these programs. So thank you all and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeanette.
Good to see you. Gracias, Janet. Thank you. Thank you, Tara.
Gracias.